Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. A dark mermaid sacrifice. The deep is a jealous god. It does not give up its children lightly. It cradles them in crushing, silent darkness, a lullaby of pressure and cold. Its beauty is a weapon, a glittering lie to mask its cruelty. I know this, for I was born of it. My name is Selene, and my cradle was the wreck of a forgotten empire, my lullaby the groan of leviathans in the trench below. The world above was a forbidden scripture, written in shifting bands of fractured light that pierced the gloom, a promise whispered on the currents. I was a creature of storm and silence, my voice a weapon my kind used to shatter hulls and call the tempests, yet in my own heart, there was only a hollow echo, a longing for a different kind of song. Our kingdom, Aquilaria, was a spire of living coral and obsidian, glowing with its own bioluminescent sorrow. It was ruled not by a king or queen, but by the abyssal accord, an ancient covenant that bound us to the depths, and by the one who enforced it, the sea witch, Thalassa. She was as ancient as the first tide, her form a shifting horror of ink and tentacle and terrible, knowing eyes. She dwelt in the geyser vents, where the earth bled heat and poison, and her currency was not pearls or treasure, but dreams. She fed on the yearning for the surface, and she claimed, it was said, every heart that dared to dream too loudly. I dreamed. Oh, how I dreamed. While my sisters wove their hair with phosphorescent jellyfish and sang hymns to the crushing dark, I would drift to the highest spires of the palace, where the water thinned and the light was strongest. I would watch the shapes, the great, lumbering shadows of the surface dwellers' ships. To my kind, they were blights, invaders. To me, they were vessels of mystery, carrying lives of fire and breath, of sun and soil. It was during a surface storm, when the ocean truly showed its wrath, that I saw him. The sea was a maelstrom, a chaos of black water and white foam. A ship, a beautiful, terrible thing of wood and sail, was being torn apart by the waves. I should have turned away. I should have joined the chorus of my people, singing the dirge that would guide the souls to the deep. But I saw a figure, clinging to a broken mast, fighting the current not with panic, but with a fierce, desperate will. I moved through the fury of the water as if it were still. My tail, the color of a moonlit abyss, propelled me with an ease the drowning could never know. I reached him just as his strength failed. His eyes, the color of a sky I had only ever imagined, were wide, not with the fear of death, but with a defiant rage against it. Our gazes locked. In that suspended moment, between the crash of thunder and the pull of the abyss, something passed between us, a spark, a recognition, a forbidden connection that severed me from my world and tethered me to his. He was a creature of another element, of air and flame, and I was a daughter of the crushing, silent deep. There should have been nothing between us but the hostility of our realms. I pulled him from the wreckage, his body heavy and alien in my arms. His skin was warm, even in the frigid water. I carried him through the churning darkness, away from the grasping hands of the drowning and the hungry things that circled below. I brought him to a secluded cove, a place where the sand was pale and the cliffs offered shelter. I laid him on the shore, the water lapping at his boots. The rain had softened to a drizzle. I watched the rise and fall of his chest, the way his dark hair clung to his forehead. He was beautiful, in a way nothing in my world was beautiful. It was a beauty of sharp angles and soft lines, of vulnerability and strength. I reached out a webbed hand, tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the shocking warmth of his skin against my cold touch. He stirred, his eyelids fluttering. A low groan escaped his lips. Fear, sharp and cold, pierced through my fascination. I could not be found. I slid back into the water, disappearing into the foam just as his eyes opened. He looked around, dazed, and for a fleeting second, his gaze swept over the water where I hid. I saw the confusion, the dawning realization of his survival, and a question in his eyes, a question about the face he must have seen in the water, the creature who had saved him. I returned to the depths, but I was no longer of the depths. The cold water felt like a prison. The songs of my sisters were a cacophony. The hollow echo in my heart was now filled with a single, burning image, his face, his sky-colored eyes. The longing became an ache, a physical pain. I drifted through the palace gardens, through forests of kelp that now felt like bars of a cage. I had to see him again. I had to hear his voice, the voice I had stolen from the storm. I had to know the world that had created him. This desire was a madness, a poison. And there was only one place to go for a cure that was also a curse. I swam towards the geyser vents, towards the lair of Thalassa. The water grew hot and acrid, the light fading to a bloody, volcanic glow. Her garden was not of coral, but of the petrified remains of those who had dared to dream. Mermaids and mermen turned to statues of obsidian, their faces frozen in eternal screams or ecstasies. She was waiting for me, her form coalescing from the murk. The little storm-born, her voice hissed, not in my ears, but in my mind. It was the sound of sand grinding on bone, of ships splintering on rocks. I have tasted your longing on the current. It is potent. You saved a surface king. You looked into his sunlit eyes, and now the darkness of your home is a suffocation. You wish to walk in his world. I could only nod, my own voice trapped in my throat by terror and need. I can give you legs, she whispered, a tentacle, slick and cold, tracing the line of my tail. A shiver of revulsion and desperate hope racked my body. I can give you the chance to win his love, a love that must be true, and freely given, not born of a debt for a life saved. But all magic requires sacrifice, little storm. A soul for a soul. A voice for a voice. She moved closer, her immense, shadowy form blocking out the hellish glow of the vents. You will give me your voice. That siren's gift that can call the waves and shatter men's minds. It is the core of your power here. And you will give me a part of your soul, the part that binds you to the sea. It will be my anchor, my claim on you. She showed me the price. The legs would be a permanent agony. Every step would feel like walking on the sharpest blades of obsidian. The air would burn my gill-less throat. I would be a stranger in both worlds, belonging to neither. And if he does not love you, she asked, her voice a venomous caress. If the sun rises on the third day and he has not pledged his heart to you, binding your soul to his in the world of air, then your soul is forfeit to me entirely. You will become one of my garden statues, a monument to foolish dreams, and the prince will suffer a fate far worse than drowning." It was madness. It was a bargain with the abyss itself. But I looked into the dark future she painted and found it less terrifying than the future without him, a lifetime of silence in the deep, haunted by the memory of a sky I had only touched once. I thought of his eyes, of the spark that had passed between us. I had to believe it was real. I had to believe it could be more. I nodded. The ritual was a torment. It was not a gentle transformation, but a violent remaking. Thalassa's magic was a living darkness that poured into my mouth, stealing my voice, pulling it from me like a silvery, glowing thread. I felt a tear from my throat, leaving a void of absolute silence. Then, the pain in my tail began, a searing, white-hot agony as bone cracked and fused, as flesh split and reformed. I was screaming, but no sound emerged. The water around me boiled with my silent anguish. I felt the part of my soul, the tether to the ocean's heart, being severed, a loss more profound than any physical pain. It was a spiritual amputation. When it was over, I was lying on the same secluded cove where I had left him. The sand was cool beneath my legs. Two strange, alien limbs. I tried to move, to push myself up, and a cry of pure, sharp agony ripped through my silent throat. It was true. Every grain of sand was a shard of glass, every shift of weight a fresh torture. I looked down at my new body, pale and trembling, and then out at the sea. It was no longer my home. It was a beautiful, merciless jailer that had let me go, for a price. And as the first light of dawn tinged the horizon, I saw a figure on the cliffs above, a prince searching the shore, drawn by a memory he could not explain. The game was begun. My voice was gone, my soul was mortgaged, and every step I would take towards him would be on feet of fire. The world of air was a symphony of torment. Each breath was a rasping fire in lungs that felt too small, too dry. The sun, which from the waves had been a comforting, dappled gold, was now a merciless eye, searing my salt-accustomed skin. And the silence within me was a cavern, an echoing void where my song used to reside. I was a ghost in a world of substance, a creature of fluid grace rendered into a clumsy, suffering thing of bone and aching flesh. I saw him before he saw me. Prince Arian, standing on the cliff edge, his profile etched against the burgeoning dawn. He was scanning the cove, his brow furrowed, a living testament to the memory I had gambled my soul upon. He was real. More real than any dream, any whispered legend of the surface. He wore his humanity like a king wears a mantle, a simple tunic, damp and torn from the wreck, clung to shoulders that spoke of strength, not just the fluid power of my kind, but a solid, earned strength. I tried to stand, to call out, but the pain was a white-hot brand up my legs. A soundless gasp was all that escaped my lips as I collapsed back onto the sand, the granules embedding themselves in my skin like a million tiny needles. The movement caught his eye. He turned, and his gaze, those sky-after-a-storm eyes, found me. There was a moment of pure, unguarded shock. I was a pale, naked creature, washed up on his shore, a mystery in the aftermath of his tragedy. He did not see the mermaid, the savior from the deep. He saw a woman, vulnerable and strange. By the gods, he breathed, his voice a low, resonant timbre that vibrated in my silent chest. It was the first human voice I had ever heard so clearly, unmuffled by water. It was a physical thing, that voice, and I craved it like I once craved the pressure of the abyss. He was at my side in moments, shrugging off his own damp cloak and wrapping it around my trembling shoulders. The coarse wool was an agony against my sensitive skin, but the gesture, the warmth of his hands through the fabric, was a different kind of fire, one that bloomed deep within the new, hollow core of me. "Can you speak?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "What is your name? Were you on the ship?" I could only stare, my eyes wide with a pain he could not understand. I opened my mouth, a futile gesture. Nothing emerged but the faint, desperate rush of air. The void where my voice had been felt like a fresh wound. His expression softened with pity. "You are mute." He said it not with disgust, but with a gentle sorrow that somehow hurt more. "And injured." His gaze fell to my feet, which were raw and bleeding from their first, brief contact with the earth. The sight seemed to startle him, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. How could someone be so wounded by mere sand? Without another word, and with a strength that stole the air from my already burning lungs, he lifted me into his arms. The world tilted, and for a moment, the only solid thing was him. The heat of his body was a forge against my cold skin. I could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart against my arm, a rhythm so alien, so vital. This was not the distant admiration from the waves. This was intimacy, a forced proximity that was both my sentence and my salvation. He carried me up the winding path from the cove to the castle that crowned the cliffs. It was a fortress of grey stone and soaring towers, a world of hard edges and sharp angles. To my eyes, accustomed to the soft, flowing lines of coral and the ever-shifting water, it was brutal, unyielding. The court was a whirl of color and sound that assaulted my senses. Ladies in silks whispered behind their hands, their eyes sharp with curiosity and judgment. Courtiers bowed to Arian, their gazes sliding over me with a mixture of fascination and disdain. I was an outsider, a prize washed up by the storm. Arian installed me in a suite of rooms that overlooked the very sea I had forsaken. The windows were a cruel mockery, framing the endless, shifting blue that was no longer my home. He was kind, relentlessly so. He provided me with soft gowns that felt like a caress and a torment against my skin. He assigned a quiet, elderly maid, Elara, to attend to me. He tried to teach me the ways of his world, the use of a fork, the subtle language of fans, the written script of his people. Our encounters were a dance of longing and excruciating frustration. He would sit with me for hours in sun-drenched gardens, talking of his kingdom, his duties, his grief for the men lost in the shipwreck. He was a prince bound by tradition, soon to be a king, and the weight of it was a shadow in his eyes. I listened, a captive audience to the inner workings of his soul, drinking in every word, every inflection. I communicated with gestures, with expressions, with the desperate poetry of my eyes. I would trace shapes on his palm, a wave, a starfish, trying to tell him a story he could never decipher. And he was drawn to me. I saw it in the way his gaze lingered on my face when he thought I wasn't looking. In the way his hand would hesitate before pulling away after helping me to walk. The connection that had sparked in the water was now a slow-burning fire on land, fanned by my silence, my mystery, my palpable, aching need. But the world was not just glittering halls. It was also deadly secrets. Lord Kalen, the king's marshal and Arian's closest advisor, watched me with the cold, assessing eyes of a shark. He saw not a victim of the sea, but a threat. "She is a distraction, Arian," I overheard him say one evening, his voice a low growl from the hallway. "A beautiful, broken thing. The court talks. You need a queen of strength and lineage, not a mute foundling who cannot even walk without wincing in pain." Arian's response was firm, but I heard the doubt, the conflict. "Her origins do not matter. She is under my protection." "Protection or obsession?" Kalen countered. "You search her face as if looking for a ghost. The ghost from the wreck, perhaps. No survivor remembers a woman. It is unnatural." The words were a blade. I was unnatural. A thing of magic in a world that feared it. The nights were the worst. When the castle slept, the true price of my bargain was collected. The memory of the sea, the part of my soul I had given, called to me. It was a siren song from the depths of my own being. I would dream of the cool, weightless embrace of the water, of the songs of the whales, of the silent, beautiful dance of the deep. I would wake gasping, my legs screaming with a phantom memory of my tale, the salt of dried tears on my cheeks. I would limp to the window, each step a fresh martyrdom, and look down at the moonlit waves. And sometimes, in the phosphorescent foam, I would see a darker shape, a shifting mass of ink and shadow. Thalassa. A silent reminder from the deep. The clock was ticking. The first day had passed. The second was dawning. I had one day left. One day to turn a prince's compassion into a love profound enough to defy a witch, to reclaim a soul. One afternoon, he found me in the music room, my fingers hovering over the strings of a harp. I could not play, but I could feel the vibration of the sea in its frame, an echo of the songs I had lost. He stood in the doorway, watching me. "I feel I know you," he said softly, crossing the room. "It is a madness, but I feel it here." He pressed a hand to his chest. "In the water, when I was drowning, I saw a face. Your face." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, caged bird. Yes. I wanted to scream. It was me. I saved you. I gave everything for this moment. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from my cheek. The touch was electric, a spark that traveled straight to my core. His eyes were dark with a confusion that mirrored my own. It was not yet love. It was a powerful, bewildering attraction, a sense of fate he could not explain. He leaned closer. The world narrowed to the space between our lips. The air crackled. This was it. The precipice. And then, a commotion in the courtyard. Shouts. The ringing of a bell. Arian pulled away, the moment shattered. "Raiders on the coast," he said, his voice hardening into that of a prince, a commander. The duty, the world, had reclaimed him. He left me there, alone in the music room, the ghost of his touch on my skin, the taste of a stolen almost kiss on my silent lips. I looked out the window. The sun was beginning its descent towards the horizon. The second day was almost gone. The ocean never forgets its debts. And mine was coming due. The third day dawned, and the sun was an executioner's axe hovering above the horizon. Every chime of the castle clock was a hammer blow against my soul. The pain in my legs had become a constant, humming agony, a background noise to the screaming silence in my throat. I had dressed in a gown the color of deep-sea twilight, a silent rebellion, a piece of my lost home worn as armor. Elara had braided my hair with a few pearls I had secreted away in a small pouch, the only treasure I had brought from the depths. They felt cold against my scalp, like the tears of the ocean itself. Arian had been gone all night, dealing with the raider threat. The castle was abuzz with a different energy, a tense, martial fervor that left no room for the mysterious, mute woman in the seaside chambers. I was an afterthought, a fragile distraction in a world of real steel and consequence. The hope that had flickered so brightly during our moment in the music room was guttering, starved of oxygen by the harsh winds of duty. He returned at mid-morning, his clothes smelling of salt and smoke, a fresh cut on his brow. He looked weary, his shoulders bowed by a weight I could only imagine. But when he saw me, waiting for him in the sunlit gallery, some of the tension left his face. It was my only power, this small ability to offer him a moment's peace. Selene, he breathed my chosen name, the one I had written for him on a piece of parchment. It meant moon, a pale, distant echo of my liquid world. He crossed the room, his boots echoing on the stone, and took my hands. His were calloused, warm, real. Forgive me. The world will not stop its demands, even for. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Even for you. I squeezed his hands, letting my eyes say everything my voice could not. I understand. I am here. Lord Kalen entered the gallery, his presence a sudden winter in the room. His gaze swept over our joined hands, his lips thinning into a severe line. The council awaits, Your Highness. We must discuss the betrothal. Princess Lysandra's envoy arrives within the week. The alliance must be secured before the winter storms. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Betrothal. Princess Lysandra. Alliance. Arian's hands tightened on mine, almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something, anger, frustration, guilt, crossed his face. The council can wait, Kalen. With respect, it cannot, Kalen pressed, his voice like grinding stones. Sentiment is a luxury for poets and peasants. A king must be made of sterner stuff. This, attachment, is clouding your judgment. His eyes, cold and flinty, settled on me. She is a beautiful mystery, Arian. But a kingdom cannot be built on mysteries. It is built on treaties, on bloodlines, on strength. I felt the truth of his words like shards of ice in my heart. This was the world I had fought so hard to enter. A world of glittering knives where love was a weakness to be excised, where a soul was a currency less valuable than a political advantage. Thalassa had not just given me legs of pain, she had thrown me into a cage where the bars were duty and tradition. Arian released my hands, his own curling into fists at his sides. "You overstep your station, Kalin." "I serve the crown," Kalin replied, unwavering. "Not the fleeting whims of the man who wears it." The confrontation hung in the air, a thick, toxic fog. Arion was torn, a man split in two. The prince who loved his kingdom, and the man who was beginning to love the enigma he had pulled from the sea. I saw the war in his eyes, and I knew, with a sinking certainty that felt like drowning all over again, that I was losing. How could a love that had no voice, no past, no political value, compete with the fate of a nation? He turned to me, his eyes full of a tortured apology. "Selene, I must." I nodded, forcing a serenity I did not feel onto my face. I gestured for him to go. I had to be the understanding one, the silent, uncomplaining ghost. It was the only role left to me. He left with Kalin, the sound of their retreating footsteps a funeral march for my hopes. I stood there, in the vast, empty gallery, the sun warming the stones around me but leaving a core of absolute cold in my chest. The third day. This was it. The final hours. I had gambled my soul on a spark, and the realities of his world were a tide meant to extinguish it. I wandered the castle, a ghost drifting through the vibrant, noisy world of the living. I ended up in the library, a cavernous room filled with the scent of old parchment and dust. Arion had brought me here before, trying to teach me his letters. Now, I drifted past shelves groaning with the weight of human knowledge, all of it closed to me. My education had been the migration patterns of great whales, the songs of the hydrothermal vents, the silent language of bioluminescence. Here, I was an illiterate creature, a beautiful simpleton. And then I saw it. A large, ancient tome lying open on a lectern. The page was illuminated with a breathtaking, terrifying illustration, a mermaid, her tail the color of a moonlit abyss, her hair flowing like seaweed, her mouth open in a silent song. And beside her, a monstrous figure of ink and tentacles, Thalassa. The text below was in a language I couldn't read, but the images screamed the story. A warning. A legend. Our legend. A shadow fell over the page. I turned. Lord Kalin stood there, his expression unreadable. "The siren's bargain," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "An old sailor's myth. Beautiful creatures of the deep who crave a human soul. They trade their voice to the sea witch for legs, but every step is agony. They have 3 days to win a prince's love, or their soul is forfeit, and the prince is cursed to a life of misery." He looked from the illustration to my face, his eyes boring into mine. A fascinating story, is it not? The things men will believe to explain the unnatural. My blood ran colder than the deepest trench. He knew. He might not believe it, but he saw the parallels. The mute woman. The painful steps. The prince's obsession. He was piecing it together, not with magic, but with a courtier's cold, calculating logic. "The prince is a man of duty," Kalin continued, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "He will do what is right for this kingdom. He will marry Princess Lysandra. Whatever game you are playing, creature, it ends tonight. If you have any affection for him at all, you will disappear." Save him from the ruin you represent." He turned and left me there, trembling before the book that held my fate, accused by a man who saw the monster beneath the skin. The sun was dipping lower, painting the sky in bloody hues. The third day was dying. Despair was a riptide, pulling me under. This was the human will to fight destiny. This was my fight. To be ground to dust between a prince's duty and a courtier's suspicion. The witch's curse was not just the pain in my legs, it was the cruel irony of my situation. I was close enough to touch him, yet forever separated by the very worlds that had created us. I found my way to the highest tower, the one that looked out over the endless sea. The wind whipped my hair and gown, a cold caress that felt more like home than anything in the castle below. The sun was a sliver of fire on the horizon. Minutes were all I had left. I heard his footsteps behind me. Heavy, hurried. Selene. I turned. Arian stood there, his face etched with a frantic determination. He had shed his formal doublet, his shirt unlaced at the throat. He looked like the man from the shipwreck again, wild, untamed, fighting against a tide. "I don't care," he said, striding towards me. "I don't care about the council, or Kaelin, or Princess Lysandra. I don't care where you came from." He reached me, his hands cupping my face, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. His touch was a brand, a promise. "All I know is that since the moment I woke on that shore, since I saw you, the world has had color. The silence in you, it speaks to me louder than any courtier's flattery. It is a silence full of storms and deep, untold stories." Tears, hot and salty, streamed down my face. This was it. The declaration. It was happening. My soul, my freedom, hung on his next words. "I don't have the words," he whispered, his forehead resting against mine, his breath warm on my lips. "I don't know what this is. It is a madness. A beautiful, terrifying madness. But I cannot let you go. Stay with me." It was not "I love you." It was not a pledge of his heart. It was a plea. A confession of confusion and need. It was real, it was passionate, it was everything I had longed to hear, and it was not enough. The witch's bargain was specific, cruel in its precision. It had to be love. True, undeniable, soul-binding love. The last sliver of sun vanished below the horizon. Darkness fell. And from the sea far below, a wave crashed against the cliffs with unnatural force. I felt it then, a violent, psychic tug, the severing of a thread. The part of my soul that was Thalassa's anchor was pulled taut. The bargain was broken. I gasped, a silent, ragged thing, my legs buckling beneath me. Arian caught me, his arms strong around me. "Selene. What is it?" I looked up at him, my vision blurring, not with tears, but with an encroaching darkness. The final part of my soul was forfeit. Thalassa was coming to collect. The game was over. I had lost. The world did not end with a scream, but with a sigh, the long, low exhalation of the sea drawing breath before its fury. The moment the sun died, a profound coldness settled in the marrow of my new bones, a void where the last tether to my soul had been. It was a physical absence, a spiritual amputation far more terrifying than the loss of my voice or my tail. I was a shell, a beautifully crafted doll waiting for its master's hand. Arion held me as I trembled, not from the evening chill, but from the internal ice of damnation. "You're cold," he murmured, his voice thick with concern, misreading the symptom for the disease. He shrugged out of his own cloak, wrapping it around my shoulders, a futile gesture against a cold that came from within. "Let me get you inside." He began to lead me from the tower, my steps faltering and clumsy, the pain in my feet a distant, secondary agony to the howling emptiness inside. But before we could reach the door, the wind changed. It whipped around the tower, no longer a breeze but a gale, carrying the scent of ozone and deep, rotting things from the abyss. It tore at our clothes, a violent, sentient thing. Out at sea, where the horizon had been a line of serene, dark blue, a wall of cloud was rising. It was blacker than any night, shot through with veins of sickly green lightning. It devoured the stars as it rolled towards the shore, moving with an impossible, malevolent speed. "By all the gods," Arion breathed, his grip on me tightening. He saw it now, not as a natural storm, but as the cataclysm it was. "The sea, it's coming for us." The first wave hit the cliffs below the castle. It was not a wave, it was a mountain of water, black and foaming, that rose and fell with a sound like the world cracking in two. The castle shuddered to its foundations. From the courtyard below, shouts of alarm turned to screams of terror. He pulled me inside, half carrying me as my legs threatened to give way entirely. The castle was in chaos. Tapestries flapped on the walls like panicked birds. Servants and courtiers ran in every direction, their faces masks of primal fear. The storm was not just weather, it was a siege. The sea was at the gates. We reached the great hall, where the high windows offered a terrifying panorama of the apocalypse. The waves were giants, pounding the shore, tearing the docks to splinters. Rain, thick and salty as blood, hammered against the glass. And in the chaos of the water, I saw her. A shape in the heart of the tempest, a coalescence of the storm's fury, Thalassa. She was vaster than I remembered, a leviathan of ink and nightmare, her form shifting between that of a beautiful, cruel woman and a monster of tentacles and rage. Her voice was the roar of the hurricane, and it was in my head, a single, triumphant command. "Come home, little storm." Arion saw it too. He stood frozen at the window, his knuckles white where he gripped the stone sill. He saw the face in the water, the same ancient horror from the sailors' myths, made flesh and fury. And he understood. His head whipped towards me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrific comprehension. It wasn't just a storm. It was a reclamation. "It's you," he whispered, the words torn from him. "This is for you." I could only look at him, my eyes begging for a forgiveness I could not ask for. The truth was a physical weight between us. "No," he said, the word hardening into a vow. He grabbed my arms, his gaze fierce, desperate. "I won't let it have you. I don't care what you are. Sea witch or siren or ghost, you are mine." He dragged me from the hall, against the tide of fleeing people, towards the lower levels. His plan, born of a human's defiant, foolish courage, was to get me to the stables, to flee inland. He believed he could outrun the ocean. He believed his will was a match for ancient magic. We burst out into the courtyard, and into hell. The wind was a solid wall, tearing tiles from roofs and sending them spinning like deadly leaves. The rain was a horizontal lash. The sea had breached the cliffs, and a knee-deep, churning torrent of freezing water and debris filled the space. "Hold on to me!" Arion shouted, his voice barely a whisper in the storm's cacophony. He forged ahead, pulling me through the current, his body a shield against the flying wreckage. But the ocean was patient. It had all the time in the world. A tentacle of water, dark and thick with weed, shot from the flood and wrapped around my ankle. It was cold as the grave, and it pulled with the weight of the entire deep. I cried out soundlessly, my feet slipping from under me. Arion turned, his face a mask of fury. He drew the sword he always wore, a fine, polished thing meant for ceremony, and brought it down on the watery coil. It severed it, and the water dissipated with a hiss. But another took its place, and another. They were everywhere, the very sea itself reaching for me. He fought like a demon, a prince battling the elements for his love. It was a hopeless, beautiful, tragic dance. He was a man of earth and fire, and this was a war of water. For every tendril he cut, two more grew. They wrapped around my legs, my waist, my arms, pulling me inexorably towards the main gate, which was now a gaping maw spewing seawater from the churning maelstrom beyond. "Selene," he roared, his voice breaking. He grabbed my hand, his fingers locking with mine, our grip the last tether between our worlds. He planted his feet, muscles straining, his body a bulwark against the tide. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw everything, the love he had not been able to name, the terror of loss, the furious, human will to fight destiny itself. "I love you. Do you hear me? I love you." The words. The words I had needed to hear, spoken not in a quiet sunlit room, but screamed into the teeth of a gale, at the very brink of oblivion. They were true. I felt their truth in the desperate strength of his grip, in the raw agony on his face. But it was too late. The bargain was already broken. The magic was already in motion. A final, colossal wave, crowned with Thalassa's grinning, terrible visage, crested over the castle walls. It was a wall of black water, and in its heart was a magic so old and dark it snuffed out the very air. It slammed into Arion, and the force of it was divine. His sword flew from his hand. His grip on my fingers was torn away. The magic of the broken bargain wrapped around him, visible as a net of glowing, sickly green light. It pinned him against the stone wall, binding him not with ropes, but with ancient power. He struggled, shouting my name, his voice a raw, desperate thing against the storm's roar. I was lifted, weightless, in the water's embrace. The tentacles of the deep were gentle now, cradling me, pulling me back. I was facing him, our eyes locked across the raging courtyard. I saw the exact moment his hope shattered. The moment he realized he had lost. The last thing he saw was my face, not fearful, but resigned, filled with a love as deep and endless as the sea that was claiming me. I tried to pour every ounce of my soul, every silent, stolen moment, into that final look. I love you. I am sorry. Remember me. Then the water closed over my head, and I was pulled back, down, into the roaring, triumphant darkness. The world of air, of sun, of him, vanished into a memory. The ocean had claimed what was its own. The silence was the first thing I noticed. Not the gentle silence of the abyss, but the absolute, suffocating silence of a tomb. I was in Thalassa's grotto, but it was no longer a place of shifting shadow and hellish glow. It was a mausoleum. The water was thick and still, heavy with despair. The petrified forms of my predecessors, the other dreamers, seemed to watch me with their sightless obsidian eyes, their eternal screams a warning I had failed to heed. I hung suspended in the center of the chamber, a doll on an invisible string. My legs were gone, replaced once more by the familiar, powerful sweep of my tail. But it felt alien now, a cage of flesh and scale. The agony of walking was gone, but a new, deeper pain had taken root in my soul, a hollow, aching void where the memory of Arian's warmth, his voice, his touch, echoed endlessly. I was home, and I had never been more lost. Thalassa circled me, her form a lazy, victorious swirl of ink and malice. Her voice was a poison in my mind, slick and satisfied. Welcome home, little storm. Did you enjoy your taste of the sun? The feel of his mortal hands upon your skin? A phantom sensation, the ghost of Arian's touch on my cheek, made me flinch. It was a worthy performance. Your anguish, your longing, it has made your soul a vintage of exquisite flavor. The final piece is now mine. I could feel it, the emptiness where my soul's tether had been. I was a husk, an instrument she had played and now discarded. My voice was gone, my soul was forfeit. I had nothing left. I was less than the statues around me, for they at least were frozen in a single moment of their despair. I was condemned to live in mine, an eternity of remembering what I had lost. Do not look so forlorn, she crooned, a tentacle, cold as death, tracing the line of my jaw. You are part of something greater now. You are a lesson. You are a monument to the folly of reaching for a world that is not your own. Your pain will nourish me for a century. And his, she paused, savoring the word. His pain will be a slow, delicious torment. He will search. He will rage against the tide. He will waste his mortal life chasing a ghost. There is no sweeter sustenance than a hope that slowly curdles into madness. She left me then, suspended in the silent, crushing dark. My world had shrunk to this, the memory of a prince's love, declared too late, and the certain knowledge of the suffering I had brought upon him. This was the true curse. Not the loss of my voice, not the pain in my feet, but this, to be a prisoner of the deep, tormented by the echoes of a love that had been so briefly, brilliantly real. On the land, the storm had broken, leaving behind a world scoured clean and wounded. The castle stood, but its lower levels were ravaged, its walls scarred by salt and the fury of the waves. The court was in mourning, not just for the lost ships and the lost lives, but for the prince who had been lost to them in a different way. Arian was a ghost in his own castle. The man who had fought a sea witch with a ceremonial sword was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out king of shadows. he refused to believe she was gone. She was taken, he would say, his voice flat, his eyes staring at some point far beyond the stone walls. Not lost. Taken. His chambers became a temple to his obsession. Maps of the ocean, ancient and new, papered the walls. He pored over charts of currents and depths, of legendary trenches and underwater ranges with names like the Leviathan's Graveyard and the Siren's Cradle. His desk was buried under sketches, my face, rendered over and over in charcoal and ink, from every angle, in every light he could remember. The curve of my smile, the shape of my eyes, the silent sorrow in my gaze. He was trying to pin a ghost to paper. He dismissed the council's concerns about the alliance with Princess Lysandra. He ignored Kaelin's pragmatic, furious arguments. She was a creature of magic, Arian. Kaelin pleaded, for the last time. A fantasy. You must let this go, for the sake of your kingdom. Arian had looked at him then, and the fire that had been absent from his eyes for weeks returned, cold and sharp. My kingdom, he said, his voice low and dangerous, is built on legends. And if the legends are real, then they can be fought. She is real. And I will bring her back. He began to gather his crew. Not loyal knights or noblemen, but outcasts. A grizzled, one-eyed sailor named Rorik who claimed to have sailed the Sea of Mists and lived. A disgraced royal cartographer named Alara, the same quiet woman who had attended me, who understood the language of forgotten maps. A half-mad old man, a self-proclaimed wave listener, who said he could hear the whispers of the deep on the wind. And others, smugglers, heretics, men and women who had nothing to lose and everything to gain from a king's desperate quest. In secret coves, under the cover of moonless nights, a ship was refitted. It was not a grand vessel of war, but something sleeker, darker, built for speed and silence. They named it the Stubborn Hope. Its figurehead was not a dragon or a saint, but a carved likeness of a mermaid, her face a perfect replica of his sketches, her expression one of longing, reaching for a world just beyond her grasp. The court thought he was mad. The rumors spread like a plague. The king, broken by a witch storm and a lost love, was chasing a fairy tale. He was abandoning his throne, his people, for a phantom. They whispered that the sea had claimed his sanity along with his mute queen. He didn't care. The human will to fight destiny was a fire in him now, burning away the prince and forging the king. He was no longer fighting for a kingdom of stone and mortar. He was fighting for a kingdom of the heart. He was fighting for a truth that was more real to him than the ground beneath his feet. The day he set sail, the sky was a flat, iron gray. The sea was calm, a deceptive mirror. A small, grim crowd watched from the repaired docks. Kaelin stood apart, his face a stony mask of disapproval and a strange, reluctant sorrow. Arian stood at the helm of the Stubborn Hope, his hands on the railing, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He did not look back. He had maps of impossible places, a crew of believers and madmen, and a heart full of a love that the ocean itself had failed to drown. The sails caught the wind. The ship began to move, cutting through the placid water, heading for the bank of mist that perpetually shrouded the distant, uncharted waters. It was a journey every map declared was hopeless. The sea was endless, the legends were lies, the gates of the deep were a myth. Yet he sailed on. Far below, in the lightless prison of the grotto, I felt it. A disturbance. A faint, impossible vibration in the water, a resonance that was not the groan of the earth or the song of a leviathan. It was the echo of oak planks cutting through waves, the whisper of a name on the air, the stubborn, defiant beat of a human heart that refused to forget. It was a sound I had never thought to feel again. A sound like hope. And in the absolute darkness, I opened my eyes. The world above was a scar of memory. The world below was a prison of silence. I existed in the in-between, a soul trapped in the gloaming of my own choosing. Thalassa's grotto was not built of stone and coral, but of regret, each obsidian statue a new brick in the wall of my confinement. I was her newest trophy, her most potent lesson. She did not need chains to hold me, the weight of my own failure was anchor enough. I drifted through the cold, still water, my tail moving out of habit, not purpose. The vibrant colors of Aquilaria had leached away, leaving everything in shades of gray and blue. The songs of my sisters were a distant, mournful hum that no longer held any meaning for me. I had heard a different music, the crackle of a fireplace, the rustle of parchment, the cadence of a single, beloved voice. That music was my true torment. I replayed our every moment. The heat of his hand on my back as he guided me through a dance I could not hear. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he tried to make me understand a joke. The scent of him, sunlight on skin, leather, and the faint, clean smell of the sea from above. The memory of his final, desperate declaration was a brand on my soul. I love you. Words that had come as a eulogy, not a salvation. Thalassa would often visit, her presence a pollution in the water. She fed me images, not with words, but with psychic intrusions. I saw Arion, through a distorted, watery lens. I saw him hunched over his maps, the lantern light carving hollows into his face. I saw the frantic energy in his eyes, the single-minded obsession that was consuming him. She showed me this not to give me hope, but to sharpen the blade of my despair. See how he suffers for you, her voice slithered through my mind. See how he squanders his kingship, his life, for a phantom. This is the legacy of your love, little storm. It is a poison. And it was. To see him like this, a king turned into a haunted cartographer of madness, was a pain worse than any transformation. I had wanted to give him joy, to be the solace in his world of duty. Instead, I had become the chain that dragged him into the abyss. I began to wish, with a fervor that shocked me, that he would forget me. That he would marry his princess, rule his kingdom, and let my memory fade into a bittersweet dream. It would be a kinder fate than this slow, public unraveling. But Arion was a man carved from a different stone. The will that had made him fight the tide was the same will that now drove him into the heart of it. He was not unraveling, he was being remade. On the deck of the stubborn Hope, the air was thick with salt and silence. The crew, a collection of the desperate and the devout, moved with a quiet purpose. They had long passed the boundaries of known charts. The water here was a strange, deep purple, and the air carried a chill that had nothing to do with the season. Strange, phosphorescent shapes moved in the depths below, keeping pace with the ship. Arion stood at the bow, his cloak pulled tight against the cold. He looked older, the softness of the prince scoured away by grief and resolve, leaving behind the hard lines of a king and a hunter. In his hand, he held not a map, but one of his charcoal sketches of my face. Rorik, the one-eyed sailor, approached, his gait steady on the shifting deck. "The current's changing, Captain," he grunted, his single eye fixed on the swirling water. "Pulling us east. Towards the mists." Before them, a wall of fog rose from the sea, impossibly high, glowing with a faint, internal luminescence. It was the Sea of Mists, a place marked on the oldest maps with skulls and the words, "Here there be monsters." The air around it was dead calm, the silence absolute, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Elara, the cartographer, joined them, her fingers stained with ink. "The wave listener, he says the whispers have stopped. He says the silence is waiting." Arion did not take his eyes off the mist. "This is the place." Kalen's warnings echoed in the stillness, the voice of reason in a world that had abandoned it. "The journey is hopeless. The sea keeps what it claims." Arion could feel the truth of it, a cold certainty in his gut. This was the edge of the world. Beyond lay only legend and oblivion. He thought of Selene. Not as the mute, mysterious woman, but as the creature of fierce, silent strength he had come to know. The way she endured pain with a grace that shamed him. The deep, untamed wildness in her eyes that spoke of storms and vast, secret kingdoms. She was not a ghost. She was a queen of a realm he could not comprehend, and he had dragged her into his world only to fail her. He would not fail her again. He turned to his crew, his voice cutting through the preternatural silence, clear and firm. "We sail into the mist." There were no cheers, only a grim series of nods. Sails were trimmed. The helmsman gripped the wheel. The stubborn hope, a sliver of wood and human courage, pointed its carved mermaid figurehead towards the glowing fog and began to move forward. The mist swallowed them whole. The world vanished into a uniform, pearlescent gray. Sound died. The lap of water against the hull, the creak of the ship, everything was muffled, absorbed by the thick, glowing vapor. They were adrift in a silent, formless void, the compass spinning uselessly. They were lost in every sense of the word. Hours bled into an eternity. Hope, that stubborn flame, began to flicker. The crew's resolve wavered, fear etching lines on their faces. This was not an adventure, it was a slow descent into madness. But Arion remained at the bow, his hand resting on the figurehead, on the carved likeness of her face. He closed his eyes, not in prayer, but in memory. He remembered the feel of her hand in his. The silent language of her eyes. The connection that had defied two worlds. It had to be enough. It had to be a compass more true than any magnet. He whispered her name into the silence. Selene. It was not a shout, but a promise. Deep in the lightless grotto, I felt it. Not a vibration this time, but a pull. A sharp, undeniable tug in the hollow core of my being. It was his voice. Not an echo, not a memory, but a present, living call. It cut through Thalas's psychic static, through the crushing pressure of the deep, as clear as if he were standing beside me. It was a sound that did not belong in this silent, hopeless place. My head lifted. My listless drifting ceased. The emptiness inside me, which I had thought was the absence of my soul, suddenly felt different. It was not an absence, but a space waiting to be filled. A space that his voice, his name, was rushing into. The ocean never forgets its debts. It is a jealous god, a cruel lover, a crushing curse. But love does not drown so easily. Far above, the ship, the stubborn hope, disappeared completely into the luminous, impenetrable fog, its fate unknown to the world it left behind. And in the absolute darkness at the bottom of the world, Selene opened my eyes, and for the first time since the waves had taken me, I began to fight my way toward the light. If the tides of Selene and Arian's story have pulled you under, then you are one of us, a dreamer drawn to the depths of dark, romantic fantasy. This journey does not have to end here. Help other listeners find their way to these forbidden shores. Subscribe to the channel, so you never miss a tale of love that defies destiny. Let the keepers of this story know you were here. Leave a like upon the shore, a signal fire in the fog for the next lost soul seeking this magic. And finally, cast your own message into the deep. Tell us in the comments, would you have made the bargain? Do you believe he will find her? Your voice is the final enchantment on this tale.